Hi, and welcome to our Infinity Wellness Minute, Thursday, Facebook Live. Today we're going to talk about genetics. So if you're here, say hi, ask any questions. I'm happy to answer anything we can on Nutrigenomics. So we started doing Nutrigenomic testing in our clinic probably about 2 years ago. We started doing genetic testing, and we're doing something called Nutrigenomics. So it has to do with nutrition and genetics, which is very, very different than just genetics for abnormalities or birth defects. This is very much around nutrition. So we do a test in our office that has 55 different genes, and that's what we're looking at the whole body. And how I like to explain this in Nutrigenomics is we can't change your genes just like we can't change your eye or your hair color. However, in Nutrigenomics, we can, in fact, fill in the gaps. We can, and I like to look at it as kind of holes in a bucket. We can fill in the nutrition into the sequence so that the sequence works properly. In some cases, other cases, we just have to give the end product so it then goes into the next pathway properly. So there's a couple different ways we can work with genes once we find out where the defects are, where the SNPs are, what they affect. And we found this to be extremely helpful in a lot of our cases of people who just aren't getting better. Whether it's anxiety, fatigue, chronic illness, those types of patients are the ones we're really finding that Nutrigenomics works best for, or, they help them get to the next healing level. So some of the things we've seen is I had one patient who, it was a child who wasn't speaking yet, and he was almost 2. And we found out he had a methylation defect. And so we found that in the Nutrigenomic testing, the Mthfr gene, and we started getting him methylating properly, and he was able to speak pretty much within a week's time. Another child wasn't walking on time, and that was another one too. So we've seen some developmental things change with genetic testing and fixing the gaps. Another huge reason we want to look at genetics is a lot of fatigue. If a patient suffered from a lot of fatigue or even anxiety or insomnia, we can find out what is missing in the genetic sequence, what's not working, and put it in. And so that's been super helpful as well. So I mentioned the Mthfr gene. That's a big one right now and a kind of a hot topic. And there's 2 different Mthfr genes we look at, 2 different Mthfrs, but that's only 2 of 12 in a whole sequence. So if somebody's just running those 2 Mthfr genes, they're not looking at the whole methylation sequence. And those 2 happen to be at the end of the sequence. So you could have a SNP further up earlier in the genetic sequence that you're missing. So somebody can have a negative Mthfr gene, but still have methylation defects because they have a genetic SNP in what we call FOLR or MTRR. These are some of the different genes in that sequence. And our test looks at not just methylation, it looks at 5 different areas. Methylation, which is how well your body converts folic acid to folate to methyl tetrahydrofolate, which is short for MTHFR, as well as methyl B12. So those 2 conversions are part of the methylation pathway, and then the methylfolate then goes into 250 other chemical reactions that help make energy. And also methylation also helps your body decide what it wants to detox. So 2 different parts here, starting the pathway from the energy and starting the detox pathways. So, hi Jane, if you're here, say hi. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions on this, feel free to type them in. We're on Facebook and Instagram for the first time. If you don't follow us on Instagram, it's Infinity Wellness ATX. So I'm doing both today, so we'll see how this goes. So that's methylation. And again, there's 2 parts, detoxification and making energy with that. But our genetic test doesn't stop there. It also then tells us how well how good of a detoxer you are. So once you decide what to methylate, what to keep, what to get rid of, we are also looking at your detox pathway. Are you able to detox things properly? So that's the second thing that the genetic test looks at. Again, it's broken up into 5 different sections. Hey, Dr. Krumka, he was a professor of mine. Good to see you on here. And then we're also looking at inflammation, how well your body handles inflammation. Another hot word in functional medicine right now is autophagy. And in this section, we can see how well your body handles or can produce autophagy, which is how well your body's cells clean themselves out. So that's a second section or third section. So we have methylation, detoxification, how well your body handles inflammation. And then we also look at the mitochondria of the cell, how well your body makes energy. So once it starts doing that conversion, as I mentioned, into methyl tetrahydrofolate, and then that is responsible for making other chemical reactions to make energy, with that pathway also has to be working. So as you can see, just looking at the MTHFR gene is not giving us a clear picture. And then another section in our test, the 5th section, is brain chemistry and neurochemistry. So we look at genes like the COMT gene, COMT, and the GAD gene. The COMT gene tells us how well your body makes and breaks down neurochemicals like serotonin and dopamine. Too much dopamine, we see a whole lot of anxiety and irritability and anger. The GAD gene has to do with converting GABA, glutamic acid to glutamine or glutamine to glutamic acid to GABA, and GABA is very, very calming. So if you have a SNP or a defect in that gene sequence, then you don't make GABA very well. There's your anxiety, because GABA is very, very calming to our brain. I guess I should back up a little bit too in how we do the genetic testing and how we read it. So we use a lab called GX Sciences, and it's super easy to do, not a blood test at all. It's just a cheek swab. You just send in cells from your cheek, and that's how we get the 55 genes. You just open this and swab the cheek. And then how we read the test is we're looking for defects. They're either, and backing up even further, we get 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 from dad. They're mixed together, they multiply a bunch of times, and that's how we're made. We were made of thousands and thousands of these chromosomes that have multiplied. And so when we read it, we're looking for, in our test, we're looking for what we call a negative, so no clinical abnormalities or no defects or no SNPs. You can have a heterozygous, meaning one parent had a genetic defect and you inherited it, or a homozygous SNP, meaning both parents had it and you inherited it. So yeah, again, we want to see no SNPs in it, but if you have a heterozygous methylation defect in the methylation pathway, that affects a lot of things. If you have a homozygous, that is definitely more detrimental in how you methylate and detox and make energy. Does anybody have any questions so far on this? So again, these tests, getting this genetic information has helped us personalize patient care better. There's a couple genes in particular that we know we have to take out certain foods. There's a gene called AOC1 gene that tells us you cannot handle histamine food very well, meaning if you eat something high in histamine, your body has an overproduction of histamine. It doesn't break it down very well. And we've seen this be life-changing for some people that would eat certain foods and break out in a rash or hives. I had a couple patients end up in the hospital with hives, and they couldn't figure it out. These foods weren't necessarily showing up on a food allergy test because it was a histamine reaction. And these same patients the same patient has kind of found a happy medium. I've got a couple patients with this. The ones that have a heterozygous SNP really can handle some histamine. And they found if the histamine's in the air, because it's not just food, if the histamine in the air is low, they can eat high histamine foods, which high histamine foods can be peppers, spinach, avocado, certain fish, chocolate, unfortunately, is high histamine. They found if the air histamine is low, then they can handle some foods. But if cedar and mold and things are high and they're having histamine reactions there, forget about it. They can't have these foods, or they'll have runny eyes, drippy nose, hives, itching throat. It presents in different levels for different people. So we've seen that be life-changing, where people are like, okay, I know if I'm having histamine reactions, avoid these foods. And some of the foods are very healthy, like avocados and spinach. I had a patient who was doing a green smoothie every day with strawberries, spinach, and avocado, which are all 3 high histamine. And sometimes she was drinking kombucha, fermented foods are high histamine. And she was ending up in the hospital with a swollen throat and hives, and nobody could figure out what was wrong. Her food allergy tests were not showing allergic to these things. So that's been a life-changing, just taking her off those simple foods has decreased those symptoms. Another big benefit we see to genetics is there's a couple genes that make people very susceptible to infections. They're not able to detox. Their body doesn't recognize infections as quicker as well. That's called the NOS2 gene. I would say, I don't want to get this wrong, I would say 98, 99%, I almost want to say 100% of our patients that have had Lyme disease have a SNP in this gene, a homozygous SNP. So we know their immune system can't detox certain infections very well, so they're opportunistic hosts. So these are really great things to learn about your immune system. If you are an opportunistic host, what can we do differently nutritionally, whether it's supplements or food changes, to make you stronger, to make your immune system stronger so you can start detoxing? Or, we probably all touch a countertop or a grocery cart and we are exposed to infections, but if our immune system's working and those genetics are reading things properly, we can get rid of it. If it's not, then they may set up shop and now you have certain infections. So that's kind of the difference between genetic testing and some examples between just genetic testing and then Nutrigenomic testing. We can actually do some things with nutrition, and some patient examples, case studies of what we've seen life-changing for patients once we find out they have methylation issues. I would say getting energy back is probably the biggest one, because if you're not able to convert to the right B vitamins, you feel tired. So literally patients who have had the diagnosis of chronic fatigue, we find out that they weren't methylating properly. We get them methylating, and it's kind of like putting gasoline in an engine, in a car. The engines start churning, they start making energy again, they can regulate their energy. So that's been life-changing for people who couldn't work with chronic fatigue, or able to get back into their jobs. I'm posting in the post here a link if you want to learn more about the genetic testing. I did 5 different educational videos that break down each section and why each section a little more detail is important. So if you want to click on that link here and follow and get the email sent to you in the videos, you certainly can. And I believe I have a patient waiting, so unless anybody has any pressing questions, I'm going to sign off, and thanks for being here.